Welcome to the Polygamer podcast, where gaming is for everyone. Join us as we expand the boundaries of the gaming community.
Hello and welcome to the Polygamer podcast, episode number 77 for Wednesday, May 9th, 2018. I'm your host, Ken Gagney, and today I'm chatting with Dr. NerdLove, aka Harris O'Malley, a renowned author, dating coach, YouTuber, podcaster, Kotaku columnist, and so much more. Hello, Harris.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. That is a lengthy introduction. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I tend to wear a lot of hats, mostly just because I keep picking up new projects and going, sure, I've got time for this.
What are some of your latest projects?
Right now, I'm actually in the middle of moving, so I'm both setting up my studio and trying to get my house in order and keep up with weekly podcast and YouTube series and find time to stream a couple more games. I started doing, after I did a review of Super Seducer for Kotaku, I've decided, you know what, I kind of want to just stream this out there and let people watch my screaming fits live. And so I did about 2 hours of it, and now I got to find time to do another, to finish off the game.
And finding time for that while moving. I find it takes me at least 2 years to finish unpacking.
Yeah, it's probably going to take about that long to get everything out of the boxes.
So all these different things that you do come under the brand of Dr. NerdLove. How do you describe yourself to somebody who has never met you before?
I tell people that I'm a dating coach and writer, and that I mostly am involved with teaching people social skills and how to date better. So when people have questions about relationships, whether they are trying to get into one, whether they've never had one, or whether they've been dating or even married for years, I'm the person that they come to try to solve a lot of their dilemmas.
You say when people are trying to get into or out of dating, but from what I've seen online, it seems like you're aiming primarily at the straight male audience. Is that true?
Yeah, most of my advice is coming from from my experiences as a straight male. And so also I kind of feel like there are probably enough guys out there telling women how to women better. And there's also not a lot of really good advice out there for men, particularly for straight cis men. Most of what's out there tends to fall under the rubric of stuff like men going their own way, or the red pill, or the manosphere, the men's rights associations. And while every once in a while you'll find that they've almost accidentally stumbled on something that's reasonable, more often than not, a lot of the stuff they offer is really toxic. And so I'm kind of the non-toxic alternative that gives practical, reasonable, real-world advice for relationships in the 21st century.
And if I understand correctly, there's been sort of an evolution in the last 5-10 years of your own philosophy in that respect. If I understand correctly, you used to be a member of the seduction community, also known as a pickup artist, as popularized by the 2005 book The Game by Neil Strauss. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was back in the early days. I wouldn't say I was OG because the pickup scene really kind of started in the late 90s. But back around the time when The Game was published is when I discovered that the pickup community existed in the first place. And after I've gone into kind of the Dr. NerdLove origin story, but after like a lifetime of being a hopeless geek with no social skills and a lot of anxiety, I basically dove into it like a duck to water. And for the first couple of years, I thought, oh my God, this is amazing. My ideas about the dating binary, that either you're good with women or you're not, was completely wrong. I can't believe this. I can't believe I've wasted all this time. But a lot of what I was learning in there wasn't necessarily about how to be a better man. It was about how to be really manipulative, how to coerce people into doing what I wanted. And I was also being taught to go for a very specific subset of type of women and where to meet them and how to meet them. And none of that was me. And I didn't like who it was turning me into. I didn't like the lessons that I realized I was learning, but I liked the fact that I was getting laid a lot. And so my thought was, all right, I can't keep doing this after just one long dark night of the soul. I said I couldn't keep doing this, but I do like the success I'm having. Is there a way that I can do this without being, a PUA and spending so much time in clubs or bars that I just don't like, talking to people that I don't like, and relating literally everything in my life to pickup? And so I kind of had to go back to the bare bones basics and start questioning everything about what I'd been taught. Why did they say, okay, it takes women 7 hours to decide whether or not they're going to go home with someone? No, it doesn't. Normally they figured it out pretty quickly. Why did they say that women only respond to this kind of behavior or need these sort of signals to be interested into somebody? What is, why do we teach guys that you have to dress this way, act this way, display this kind of value? And as I was going through all that, I'm reading all of these books. I'm reading What Women Want by Daniel. I can't think of his last name off the top of my head. I'm reading books on human sexuality. I'm reading books on social psychology and getting a more rounded idea of what's actually out there and what people actually believed, and especially like what female sexuality was like, straight female sexuality in particular, and realizing how much of what I had been taught wasn't social skills. It wasn't, psychology so much. It was high pressure sales tactics. And so a lot of it came from stuff like Eric Cialdini's influence. And like, here's all the ways that you can manipulate someone into doing what you want, even if they kind of regret it afterward. I had to leave a lot of that behind and kind of work on a more organic, more natural, and less toxic version. I hesitate to call it more feminist because there's a lot of like baggage with quote unquote male feminists out there, but at least more positive, for lack of a better term, towards, women, female sexuality, and just gender ideas entirely.
When you say you like the success that you were having, you were wondering if you can have that without being a pickup artist. Is that to say that your methods have changed and the goals have not, or are the goals different as well?
The whole thing kind of changed because when I was a pickup artist, it was all about the numbers. If I could get laid every single day of the week, then hey, that was an amazing week. Since then, especially when I made my transformation, it was like, all right, I'm not going to worry about numbers. I'm not going to worry about, I want only, these really hot club girls. I want to find people that I can have a really solid conversation with, people that I would be interested in hanging out with and talking with, even if sex was just completely not on the table, because that way, if I'm flirting with them, then nothing happens. They're just not interested in me. Then cool, I've met someone awesome. And that's great. As opposed to, okay, I didn't get a phone number. I'm a failure as a man. And so as a result, the number of people that I was sleeping with went down, but I was way happier. And I wasn't sitting around feeling like, oh God, I don't want to go out this weekend, but I really have to, because if I don't, then what am I? And so I was making better, deeper connections with people instead of just, all right, what do I have to do to get this person to go to bed with me and then possibly never talk to them again?
Can you go into some of the baggage you hinted at that comes with being a male feminist?
There are a lot of people out there who've positioned themselves as male feminists. I mean, one of the most famous ones was Hugo Schweitzer, who in a lot of ways, like me, put himself out there as, the bad boy turned good. And he was using a lot of that as a way to literally prey on unsuspecting people. And it just got really, really kind of gross. And he was just extremely predatory and manipulative with women. And he was sleeping with his students when he was teaching. And there are a lot of people out there like that. And I really one of the things I really want to try to do is avoid being like that. I want to be open, honest, legit with people and not just like, hey, look at my creds, look at this. And honestly, it also tends to be a case of like, I have at best a feminist 101 level of understanding. There are a billion women out there who have said, who have taught me through their books, through their Twitter feeds, through everything, and who can say shit better than I can. So I'm out there literally I'm here to teach men how to be better men.
Well, I agree that we all have a lot of growth to do to become better feminists. I hope that doesn't prevent you from thinking of yourself as a feminist.
No, I definitely think myself as a feminist. I mean, there was a point before I learned more about it, I was like, no, I'm not a feminist, I'm an egalitarian. And then, did more reading and realized why that doesn't necessarily work, because that assumes that everything is equal. And even in this day and age, it so totally isn't.
I want to talk to you today primarily about the intersection of dating and gaming, because how I first became aware of you actually was in an October 2016 article in Game Informer all about how video games are used to keep people together across long-distance relationships. So what is it that is unique about gamers that has you targeting that subset as part of your audience, that helping gamers navigate the dating scene?
One of the things that has come up a lot is kind of a deterministic identity issue, where a lot of people who identify as gamers or who identify as more generalist nerds or geeks tend to see themselves as, by definition, being hopeless with women, having no social skills, buying into the stereotypes out there about geeks, gamers, and whatnot, and thinking that this is just how life is, that there are no alternatives. And one of the things that I'm a big believer in is the stuff that you are into does not disqualify you from being a amazing boyfriend, partner, whatever. The fact that you like gaming does not mean that you are, by definition, a sexless nerd. It just means that you like games. It is just what you like to do. There are so many fascinating ways that games and social life interact these days. It is really not a joke to say that more people have gotten together because of World of Warcraft than because of Match and OkCupid.
Really, World of Warcraft has done a better job bringing relationships together than sites dedicated to that purpose?
Yeah, because it's not that people are going on to World of Warcraft specifically looking for dates, but what they're doing is they're interacting with other people who have similar interests that they do. I mean, if you are playing World of Warcraft, then you obviously like MMOs. When you're meeting up with people who may be in your city, who may be across the country, who may be across the planet, you're meeting people who have a lot in common with you. And especially if you're questing together, if you're guildies, then you're spending a lot of time together. You're getting to know each other. And as much as you may be coordinating stuff during raids, there's also going to be a lot of just personal chat and just getting to know each other. And a lot of people meet their future partners that way. And it's really kind of fascinating to watch. And for other people, gaming has been a way of maintaining their relationships while they're apart. Now that most of the country, there's still a lot of parts that don't, have access to high-speed internet and online gaming has become more of a normalized thing, it's possible for couples who are separated because of jobs, because of school, just because of where they live, to be able to interact and spend time together and doing things together in ways that previously wasn't. So you may not necessarily be able to go out on a date like you would if you're in a long-term relationship, but you both can hop on to Overwatch on the same team and play together. Or you can hop on and do some raids on Destiny or play World of Warcraft or any other MMO out there.
It's interesting that WoW would be so successful at pairing people, because with OkCupid, for example, I can go online and say I'm looking for a liberal atheist who doesn't want kids, whereas with World of Warcraft, all I know about the other person is that they like MMOs. And as you said, gaming doesn't necessarily define me, it's just something I like to do. I wouldn't think it would be that important in finding somebody to partner with.
Well, one of the things that is actually a slight drawback to online dating, and don't get me wrong, I think online dating is a great tool to have in one's toolbox when you're trying to find a partner, is that it's almost possible to over-specialize. You can narrow down so very far in terms of what it is that you want in a partner that you almost run the risk of missing opportunities for serendipity, where if you met someone in a class, for example, or at an event, and you start talking, you may find out, hey, they don't necessarily meet all of my checklist of what I think I want in a partner, but this person is so awesome and we have so many other things in common that I would really like to see them again. With OkCupid, that's a little harder to do. And when it comes to online gaming, and if you're spending a lot of time talking with other people, you're going to get to know them in ways that you're not necessarily going to get to know them if you're talking to someone specifically for dating. So when you first get to know someone on OkCupid and you have this very specific agenda, it's like, all right, I want to see if there's chemistry there. I want to see if we have enough in common. When you're talking with someone who's on your raid team on Destiny, yeah, you want to be able to communicate well and be able to coordinate your actions so you can get through the mission each time. But also during downtime, you may be just chit-chatting, shooting the breeze, and discovering all these things that you're into. And so you're getting to know each other in a more organic way, in the way that you might get to know somebody that you met in real life if you had just met them if you had met them at the GameStop or whatever and just struck up a conversation.
Is there something out there that's the best of both worlds, either a game intended for dating or a dating website that's intended for gamers?
I've seen some websites that have been intended for matching geeks and gamers. One of them was Dragon Fruit, that kind of had the OkCupid, I'm going to match you up by stuff in your profile sort of thing. But in terms of anything that has been dedicated for both, not really. I think it would be interesting to see that happen. I don't know if it necessarily could work, partially just because I think that too many people might look at that and kind of might look at it with a bit of a cocked eyebrow and go, not sure if serious.
In that case, since we do have alternatives like OkCupid and Match, one of the questions I got on Twitter preparing for this interview was, a lot of these websites encourage you to list your favorite books, your favorite movies, your favorite albums or artists. Is it appropriate to list your favorite video games on a service like that?
I certainly don't see why not. If it's something that you enjoy, something you have a lot of emotional connection to, and then why wouldn't you? And sometimes it means that you'll find people who want to talk games with you. So like maybe you have a favorite moment in a game that made you react emotionally. For example, I've had fun talking with people about like what moment in games really hit you hard. And for me, I think one of the ones that stands out for me was in Fable 2 when, spoiler for an over 10-year-old game, when the main villain shoots your dog. And I had never wanted to kill someone harder in my life. And that has led to conversations with people going like, oh, no, but then, there was this other time in this other game, like in The Last of Us, when you have to do this thing. And like I just sat there at the end going like crying and just bonding over these shared emotional experiences that were brought about because we both love games.
I think the concern about putting gaming out there in your first profile is, as Twitter user Play Critically said to me, I don't put those kinds of things in my dating profiles out of the belief that the people viewing it will, quite justifiably I think, assume I'm a raging goober-gator misogynist. So how do you navigate around that stereotype?
There are a couple of ways of getting around that. And the first is that, no, this is a very reasonable fear, considering that how much gatekeeping has become part of the stereotypical nerd activity. It's, once Gamergate ended up being a national thing instead of people on Twitter having to explain to their friends, no, seriously, this is what they're angry about. It kind of put the idea of the gamer identity out there as, I'm not sure about this. But at the same time, one of the things you want to do, especially when you're dealing with an online dating situation, is you want to be, I forget who said this originally, but I've kind of adopted it myself. You don't want to be everybody's cup of tea. You want to be somebody's shot of whiskey. You want someone who really digs what you have to offer, as opposed to someone who only kind of digs it. And being upfront with, this is part of what I love to do. This is part of how I spend my time, is an important way of matching with people. And it also helps filter out the people who just don't like games, don't think it's a worthwhile activity. And also a way of finding the people who do like the things you do. One of the things I tell people when they're going into online dating is you need to think of it as dating SEO. You need to think of what the people you would want to match with are looking for, and be sure to include that in your profile. So if you are a comic fan, don't just say, hey, I like comics. Say, hey, I really love, Christopher Priest's run on Black Panther, or I really like Saga. If you like games, then saying, hey, I really enjoy Overwatch, or I really enjoy any other particular game that you happen to like. Maybe you're really playing Into the Breach, or you really like playing Breath of the Wild on Switch. This means that people who also like the things that you like are going to have an easier time finding you. And as for dealing with the stereotype of, I list a game and everybody thinks that I'm a, goober rageaholic who hates women, show through the rest of your stuff that you aren't. I mean, we've all got the mental image of, while you were having premarital sex, I was studying the blade. But if you can show you've got social skills, you can show that you have a life that's more than just you and your PS4 or your Xbox, that you have well-rounded interests, and people will understand this is just part of who you are, not necessarily the only thing about who you are.
As part of that stereotype, the Polygamer podcast has a previous episode all about toxic masculinity, where I spoke with Dwayne DeFore on that subject. Do you feel that toxic masculinity is more or less pronounced among gamers? Is there a correlation there?
I think that amongst the loudest of gamers, you're going to find a lot of toxic masculinity, which is kind of ironic considering how at the same time, the same people who would scream about, say, feminist frequency are also the ones who will be the first to say, I got into games because women rejected me and because the jocks bullied me. And in a very real way, they're recreating the same system that excluded them, except now they get to be in charge of it. So all that's happened is that they've just transferred the same toxic stereotypes into a form that they feel applies to them. And you also see it in a lot of the ways that the games play out and then the way the characters are designed. While it's definitely improving, there was a point where in the 90s, the gaming industry and the computer games industry as a whole decided that they would rather focus their advertising on young boys than on men and women. They decided that, young boys and men were early adopters who were more likely to go out and spend more money on equipment and games. And so you can really track the change in the ads from where it was more inclusive to more, hey, we're going to market this with, look at this woman in lingerie. Oh, and by the way, play our game. Look at this. You can see Lara Croft's boobs. And it really kind of informed a lot of the way that the culture ended up developing. And this even continued more when we got when online gaming for Xbox started to become really the only form of like online gaming. The old RTS wargamers who played the really, really stat heavy hex games used to kind of lament about the first person shooters because of the toxic shit talking that would go on during the game. But as RTSs kind of fell out of favor and first person shooters like Call of Duty became more and more of it, then that aggression, that shit talk, that homophobia, it really became, part of the culture. And we've seen that crop up over and over again. Back in a few years ago, when there was a big stink about sexual harassment in a gaming tournament, I wish I could think of the woman's name off the top of my head. She basically was harassed so much by even her teammates that she sacrificed a game because she couldn't take it any longer. And people were saying like, hey, that, trash talk, being called out, sexual harassment, that's all just part of the culture. Get used to it. And anyone who pushes back against that, they get called a cuck, they get called a pussy, they get called a mangina. And all of that is just, hey, be a real man instead of, a chick trying to steal games from us. And no one's trying to steal games from you. It's just expanding so that you're like, that small core audience is no longer the only people that people market to.
Given that there are those examples of misogyny and gatekeeping, it seems like gaming or World of Warcraft or other online games might not be the best place for couples to meet each other.
It's really going to depend. I know a lot of people who have said they will game only with a gender-neutral username or with voice chat off. But when you get to know people, and you get to know them as they actually are, when they don't have expectations on you based on whether the person they're talking to is male or female or non-binary, then it's easier to get a feel for the real person. And then, trust develops. You start communicating over other forms. Like, so you might start talking on Discord or Slack, chatting on Skype, and getting to know them better that way. I wouldn't necessarily say that one should use World of Warcraft as OkCupid. I don't think going on there to find dates is a good idea, because that just gets back into the early days of, joining a chat room going, hey, everyone, ASL. And that gets obnoxious really quickly. But one of the ways that I always tell people is if you want to meet people, diversify where you're going and what you're doing so that you have this chance to meet people organically and make friends and broaden your social circle. Because if you go to a meetup in, I hate to say the phrase the real world, but, if you go to a meetup event and meet people there, you don't want to go there specifically to pick someone up. Nobody likes somebody coming into their event like a horny shark. But if you go there and assume, okay, I may not meet the love of my life, but I may meet some really cool people who might then introduce me to the love of my life, then you do much better. The same goes with World of Warcraft or other online games. You don't go there specifically to get laid, to find a boyfriend or a girlfriend. You go there to just enjoy yourself and to meet people who have things in common, who also enjoy the things that you do. Then you have the opportunity for serendipity, fate, whatever you want to call it, to bring you in contact, if not with Ms. Right or Mr. Right, then at least with people who might put you in contact with them.
As you said, if that isn't your goal, if your goal is instead to have a good time, meet interesting people, be a better person, learn a new skill, and your happiness is tied to your success, you're more likely to be successful and happy if those are your goals, as opposed to, putting another notch on the bedpost.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that took a lot for me to learn pretty much all over the place. When I was in the pickup scene and tying my self-esteem to, did I get a phone number that night? Did I get a date? Did I get a kiss? Then every night that I didn't do well, I was coming home feeling lower than a snake's ass in a wagon rut. But when it was just, when I would phrase it to myself as, all right, somewhere out there is adventure. Somewhere out there is a story. I don't know what it's going to be, but I'm going to find it. And it may be that I meet some cool people. It may be that I get a date. Who knows? But I'm going to go out there and I'm going to enjoy myself when I find my story. I started enjoying myself way more because I was going out there. I was being my organic self. I wasn't putting up this, Harris O'Malley pickup artist facade that I thought I had to be. I was just me. I was having conversations. I was open to any opportunity that came my way. I was talking to everybody, couples, men, women, people who were obviously in relationships, people who I was not attracted to. Why? They seemed interesting. And I got to know a lot of people. I had a lot of fun and I had better connections. And the same thing going with games. When you're going into, even if it's not necessarily in a game itself, even if you are going to, say, PAX or some other gaming convention, and you're going there not because, hey, look, there are women there who like what I'm into, but you're going there because, you know what? I love games. I want to meet my fellow gamers. I want to see what's out there. I want to go to some panels, and, who knows? Maybe I'll make some new friends while I'm there. Then you are going there without expectations. You're going there without an agenda. Not only are you going to have more fun, but you're going to interact with people in a more natural and more appealing way because you're not sitting there thinking, all right, what is it exactly that I have to do to get what I want? You're thinking, I really like talking to this person. Maybe I should friend them on Facebook. Maybe I should follow them on Instagram. Maybe if there's a connection, we can exchange Skype and we can talk later.
Of course, if you are going to friend them on Facebook, you want to make sure you're not toeing over the line to cyberstalking either.
Oh, definitely. Which is one of the reasons why when I'm telling people, it's like, all right, how do you get the number? Well, ideally, you'd say, hey, I've got this thing going on that I'm doing. I think you would really enjoy it. I would love for you to come with me. Would you like to go? Yes, cool. Here, let's exchange numbers so we can plan things. If you're going to connect with someone, say, at a convention, say, I'm really enjoying talking with you. Is it cool if I add you on Facebook? And then if you have your smartphone there, you can go ahead and say, hand me your phone and say, hey, could you, put in your username so I can make sure it's the right profile? They say, sure, here you go. You send the friend request. There you go.
So one of the other differences between World of Warcraft and OkCupid, with online dating sites, I can put in that I'm looking for somebody locally or within my driving range, for example. With World of Warcraft, you're going to meet people all over the world, and that might result in a long-distance relationship. You mentioned earlier that games like World of Warcraft or Destiny or Overwatch can actually be useful to keep long-distance relationships going. Can you talk a bit about that?
One of the things that is really important for couples, whether you are in the same room together or separated by great distance, is feeling like you do things together, like you have accomplishments together. And this could be anything from, doing, say, a puzzle escape room, or going to pub night trivia, or going hiking, or going rock climbing, or it could be solving quests together. Because you are reinforcing the idea of the two of you as a team, it's you and your partner against the world, you're brought together and you're able to say, look at what we are able to accomplish together. Look at these things we do together. We are overcoming these challenges together. And the outlook of we are overcoming challenges together is an important part of how you make a relationship last. because no relationship, no matter how amazing it is, comes without conflict or comes without challenges. And sometimes they're internal challenges where the two of you have a personality conflict. Sometimes it's external challenges where something has happened. Maybe one of you lost your job. Maybe one of you is dealing with a problem at work or a problem at school or a personality conflict with a friend. And these can be the moments that either bring you closer together or that can split you apart. And it all depends on how you view it. If you view it as, here's this thing that was rough, but we worked at it together and we overcame it, then you are setting this mental story, this mental frame. You're telling the story of your relationship. And that story is, here's how we are better as a team than we ever would have been individually. Whereas if you are saying, here's the time that we almost broke up and only by the grace of God did we stay together, you're saying that you're saying, hey, the two of us don't work well as a team. We only stayed together through luck, through opportunity, through chance. When you work together to overcome things, you're just reinforcing we are a team, and that is important.
You did mention Overwatch, Destiny. In the Game Informer article, you mentioned Portal 2. Are there other games you recommend as being good co-op games?
Honestly, there are any number of ways to do co-op games. I love games that you can literally play cooperative, where it's you and your partner, or even you and a team against the AI. I mean, games like Left 4 Dead or Vermintide can be fun. Or it could be ones where if there's some way of doing a sort of, if you can say, get together on Skype and kind of play it together, if it's something like a Telltale game, and you can kind of discuss, all right, here's how we're going to play this. Here's the choices we're going to make. Any game can be co-op if you want to make it that way.
It's interesting that you mentioned Telltale, because I've actually done that. I've played the Batman game where we take turns in different scenes. Playing The Witness by Jonathan Blow, we would take turns. The Xbox 360 game Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons, where each analog stick is one of the characters. You can sit intimately with somebody and have one hand each on the controller, and each of you controls a brother. Now, that doesn't really work when you're in a long-distance relationship, of course.
Well, it can if you can stream it over, say, if you can stream it and just have an audience of the two of you. If there is a way of like screen sharing with them, then you could say play Life is Strange Before the Storm together, and then kind of treat it almost as an interactive movie, which is actually what my wife and I did when I was playing LA Noire. She would be like, oh, wait, you're going to play this game? Hold on. Would literally make a bowl of popcorn and come and sit down with me as I was leading Detective Felt through the latest case. And then as we're watching, she would be saying things like, oh, no, talk to that guy, or giving me her theory of the crime as it was happening.
And do you have any preference personally whether or not somebody actually has a second controller in their hands and is playing with you, as opposed to the form of contribution that your wife made?
Yeah, honestly, I like it better when it's the two of you working together in the same game. But sometimes that isn't necessarily going to be practical, and sometimes someone may not necessarily have the skills or the hand-eye coordination to play the game to the same level. So there are times when I've seen people who are like, I love puzzle games because I just don't have twitch reflexes. And there's also a lot of really cool, team games where you work against the game itself when you get into stuff like tabletop gaming or board games. So games like Pandemic or Flashpoint, or to a certain extent ones like Betrayal at House on the Hill, are other ways of playing these games. And now, especially since you can play a lot of them on mobile devices, on your iPad or your Android device, then you have a way of gaming with people across the country as well. That doesn't necessarily mean that you both have to have Xboxes.
So it sounds like you're a board gamer as well.
I try to be. It's just a matter of one of the annoying things about as you get older and all your friends and you all have more responsibilities is finding time to get together to play things. But yeah, I love playing games like Forbidden Desert or Forbidden Island.
One of the other challenges as your friends get older is they tend to have kids, and then they want to play Candyland or Monopoly, and there are better choices out there. You just can't bring yourself to play Monopoly anymore.
Yeah, and that's why it can be really, really fun to bring games that you can kind of encourage kids to play because they kind of tap into other ideas that they like. So you might slowly introduce them into, say, racing games. Like there's one called Formula Day, I believe it's called, where it's Formula One racing, and it comes in multiple levels, where there's the very simple version all the way to the you're having to manage gears and drive properly, otherwise you risk spinning out. So you can kind of slowly introduce them into slightly more complex games.
I don't tend to play games a lot with my nieces and nephews, but I do give them games that their parents might not otherwise. Like there was one called Turtles, which surreptitiously teaches them logo programming, because I know if it's solely up to my brother and his wife, his kids won't grow up to be geeks, so I'm trying to have that influence on them through the games they play.
Yeah, and there's a lot of really fascinating ways to learn skills through games. Another one that's kind of like that is Robo Rally, where it is teaching you a lot of if-then statements and a lot of, okay, you have to think 3 to 4 moves ahead, because where are you going to land? Well, it's going to take you onto this thing that's going to move you over here, and that's going to put you into the path of this other thing. So how do you avoid that? Okay, well, you're going to stack your moves so that you know that when you end, you're going to be in a place that's going to move you to a place that's an advantage for you. And it's deceptively simple. But once you start getting into it, then you start thinking further and further ahead. And I have seen kids pick it up so very quickly and become devious little masters of it that after a while, it's kind of like, I'm starting to regret having taught you to play this because you're kicking my ass.
Do you play role-playing games like D&D as well?
I love to. It's just a matter of finding the time for it. I used to do D&D all the time. I realized that 3rd edition is technically better, but I have so much affection for the 2nd edition rules that's kind of my preferred system.
That's where I stopped as well. AD&D 2nd edition.
Yeah, and I also, for a while, I was trying to do World of Darkness games, and it was in a mage campaign that I really enjoyed. But at the time, I was in a really toxic relationship with someone who thought games, especially role-playing games, were pointless and stupid. And so the few times I was, allowed, air quotes, to game, I would be, down with my friends, and then she would suddenly decide, like, nope, I've decided we're going off to go do this other thing. You're coming with me, and I would just be kind of dragged along.
It is difficult when you're dating somebody who doesn't approve of your pastimes. For example, I dated somebody who had a degree in English literature, and she found it almost offensive that I enjoyed comic books. She found them too base and puerile. What does one do in those circumstances where they have very explicit disapproval about one of their favorite hobbies?
Well, ideally, you find someone who, if they don't share your hobby or your interests, can at least understand your hobby or interests. They may not necessarily get like all of the complex backstory of Black Panther or the Avengers, but they can at least respect the fact that you like it and let you do your thing, because it's an important part of relationships that everybody have a life outside of the relationship as well as inside the relationship. But if that doesn't necessarily work, then maybe the thing you could do is show them counterexamples, so that, sure, your girlfriend did not necessarily like comics, but you could show some of the masters of the comic books that aren't superheroes. You could show Persepolis or Fun Home or From Hell, or if you really wanted to, you could show some of the more complex superhero stories. Like you could, everyone cites Watchmen, but it was a really great example of superheroes are more than just steroid power fantasies. And then if that doesn't work, if they still really just hate this side of you, that's the point when you kind of have to wonder, is this conflict a price that I'm willing to pay as part of being in this relationship?
Yeah, it's true that comic books are incredibly complex. Some of my favorite ones are, there was one called Superior about a 12-year-old boy who turns into a superhero like Shazam, except when he's a kid, he has multiple sclerosis, just like my mom. And it was amazing to see him escape that diagnosis with his superpowers. Or not a comic book, but a novel that came out recently, Dreadnought, about a transgender superhero. These are great media in which to discuss these issues.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I'm really loving about where comics and fantasy fiction especially and games are going, is that we're seeing so much more representation. And we are seeing we're seeing characters who are more than just either stereotypes or straight white males in gaming, straight white, brown haired, square jawed, unshaven men being presented out there and giving more people this opportunity to see themselves represented in these fantasy worlds.
Absolutely. I fully agree. At the top of the hour, you mentioned that I think you were streaming a game called Super Seducer. Is that right?
Yes, it's a pickup artist trainer.
Seriously?
Yeah, it is. It was created by a pickup artist who I guess he now calls himself a dating coach named Richard La Ruina. And originally it was on Kickstarter, but it got kicked off of Kickstarter because Kickstarter has a rule of no seduction manuals. And then eventually he just, I guess, finished financing it himself or found outside financing. And it's the only way that I can think to describe it is it's like Dragon's Lair for assholes. It's a full motion game where you are guiding this person, played by Richard, through various scenarios where you are trying to meet and date and occasionally sleep with women. So the first one that you go through is him trying to pick up a woman on the street during the day. Then you're trying to pick up two women in a nightclub. There's another scene where he's trying to get out of the friend zone, which that alone makes me roll my eyes. There are two scenarios for when you're on a first date with someone, and the whole thing is unbelievably horrifying. As a game, it is bad. It is just badly structured. It is badly paced. The writing is awful, and the acting is worse. But in terms of the lessons it teaches, occasionally it hits the heady heights of not entirely wrong. And then other times the advice they give is literally like, no, do not ever do this. This is not something that is actually going to work. This is going to just make people feel weird and creeped out. Please do not do this to people, especially, women who are just walking down the street trying to go meet their friends or trying to get through their commute.
So what was your purpose in streaming such an atrocity?
Mostly to poke at it and go like, all right, here's what they're saying. Here's why it's wrong. Here's what you should do instead. Here are the times when he actually stumbles on stuff that is actually correct or at least not entirely wrong. And also occasionally make fun of it because, it's how you keep your sanity with the help of your robot friends.
What other kinds of games do you tend to stream?
That was actually my first.
Oh, really?
That was the first time I was ever like, you know what? I feel like I should share this with my readers.
Well, there are other kinds of games that might fall into your purview. What do you think about dating simulators, which is a very popular genre, especially in Japan?
I think they can be really interesting, and I think that you can run the gamut with them, where you have some that are just really bad porn, and then you have some that are really interesting, just novellas or novels. I mean, there's a reason why they call them literal, visual novels. And then you have other ones that are really kind of interesting in how they play around with things, like Lady Killer in a Bind, where you have the main character is a woman who is cross-dressing as a man to take her brother's place while at a school event, and is involved in various bondage relationships. And it talks a lot about power exchange and consent and gets into some really interesting discussions about those. Or you might get Dream Date Daddy, I'm saying the name wrong, which is a gay dating sim, including where you can have any number of characters, including a trans daddy. So that you have this, dating these various, gay men who are across the spectrum. You've got the more macho type. You've got someone who's closer to being, a bear. And then you've got other people who are, you under other circumstances, you might think that they were straight or just up and down the gender spectrum. And that is another time of seeing relationships that you would not normally see depicted, and especially depicted positively in games. And so I think a lot of them can be really, really good.
I haven't gotten into the genre myself. I think partly because the first one I tried was itself sort of a parody of the genre, and since I had no basis by which to appreciate it, it was Hatoful Boyfriend, and I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah, that one, you can play it just for the sheer absurdity of it, But at other times, it's just like, okay, this is clearly a reference to tropes that I'm just not familiar with.
Because I was not looking for advice on how to date pigeons.
Yeah. I would not necessarily recommend dating sims as a way of learning how to date, partially because I don't like the idea of necessarily gamifying dating, because that's part of what the pickup artist scene did for the longest time. If you would listen to pickup artists, especially back in the early days when it was really jargon heavy, you would be forgiven for thinking that you were listening to people talking about Dota now, as they're talking about how, like, all right, well, she had her bitch shield up, so I had to really just drop a couple of negs on her to bring that down, then segue into a DHV story to really raise my mating value, and then we moved into Comfort 3, and then from there I was able to move into Seduction. And it's just like, it's trying to treat human interaction as though it were a flow chart or a series of if-then statements where if you critical path your way through it, then you're guaranteed sex. And that's just not how humanity works.
Right. What you just described, that whole process, that whole workflow sounds terrible.
Yeah, and that was a lot of what I was learning, and especially because so much of it was routine-based and creating these artificial personalities and using pre-written, pre-digested stories to try to hit what they would call demonstrations of higher value, because you have to be a high-value man in order to get laid, and very narrow definition of what high value is. And yeah, the whole thing was just really disturbing and manipulative, and trying to do things like they would do what was called the compliance ladder, where the more that you can get someone to do things, the more that they are inclined to keep doing things for you. So you start off with a small ask, and then you kind of build on it, because the more you can get someone to say yes, the more likely they are to keep saying yes. And when I say these are high pressure sales tactics, this is exactly what, car salesmen do. So when you go to the car salesman and they're like, all right, well, let's sit down. Hey, would you like some water? That's starting the compliance ladder. And they're doing things like they're leveraging reciprocation, so that now they have done this thing for you, you feel like you're obligated to pay that favor back.
Wow. So much psychological warfare.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really kind of disturbing when you really break it down.
Well, I'm glad that you've moved away from that and that you're now sharing your experiences and lessons with other people. Do you have any success stories of people who have come to you for advice, or anything that they've come back to you later and said, hey, this really made a difference to me, or this really changed my mind about how to interact with people?
I've had them pretty much running the gamut from, you've changed me because now I'm not this angry person anymore who feels resentment towards the world because I'm owed a girlfriend. Now I understand better what I need to do, to people who said, I thought I couldn't date. I thought that I was just the sort of person who was never going to have a relationship, that people would never like me. And in one case, I actually performed their wedding ceremony.
Really? What qualifies you to do that?
I'm certified as a minister from the Universal Life Church.
Ah, I love the ULC. I'm familiar with them as well.
Yeah, no, I love them too. There was just literally a day when I was in college, I was like, I'm bored. Let's be a priest.
And that's all it takes.
They're also who I've got my doctorate from. I've got a doctorate in metaphysics through them, so I'm a real fake doctor.
I find that one less valuable than being ordained.
Yeah. No, I got that literally just so I could say, no, I'm a doctor. See, here's my doctorate.
So you are a jack of many trades. Let's plug one of your other projects briefly. Tell me about the Good Men Project.
Good Men Project is I'm kind of tertiarily involved with that. They republish a lot of my stuff. So, but the whole idea behind the Good Men Project, and it's undergone some changes multiple times, is literally how do we learn how to become better men overall? And what does it mean to be a man in the 21st century now that we are striving for greater gender equality, now that we are striving for greater understanding of sexuality and greater understanding of gender presentation? So how do we quote unquote man up when we have to redefine what that means? How do we present as men? What does it mean to be a man if you are trans and you are particularly femme looking? What does it mean to be a man if you don't reach a lot of what is considered manly ideals? Maybe you're not terribly handy. Maybe you're not terribly macho. What does it mean if you prefer more intellectual or, non-traditionally masculine pursuits. Does that make you any more or less manly? And talking about dealing with things like, okay, what about violence? How do we talk about violence? How do we talk about consent, especially enthusiastic consent? How do we teach our children what it means to be masculine and feminine, how to interact with people, how to encourage their gender identity?
Oh, those all sound wonderful. And I'm glad you're discussing things like trans issues and sexuality and orientation and gender identity issues, because as we said at the top of the show, a lot of your dating advice is addressed to straight men. I was going to ask you, where do you recommend people go for like your counterpart in the LGBT community? Where can people go for that sort of advice?
There are a lot of people out there who are giving advice. I mean, one of the people I refer to as my celebrity patronus is Dan Savage, who is the kind of the great granddaddy of a lot of modern advice out there. And there is so much great advice that it's kind of hard to know where to stop. And one of the people that I recommend folks go to all the time is Captain Awkward, who she does an advice column, and one of her specialties is helping people come up with scripts and exactly what it is you need to say in these specific situations.
Fantastic. And to remind our listeners, if they want your advice, where can they find you online?
Well, you can find me on my blog at drnerdlove.com. You can follow me on Twitter at drnerdlove. You can join the Facebook page at facebook.com/drnerdlove. Again, drnerdlove. Honestly, if you put Dr. Nerdlove into Google, you will find most of my social media. I'm also on Instagram. I'm on YouTube. And yeah, you can find me pretty easy.
Awesome. I will include links to those as well as the other resources you mentioned in the show notes found at polygamer.net. Harris, any closing remarks?
One of the most important things I can tell anybody who is looking to find that special someone, whether it's on online dating, whether it is someone that you met and are starting to form a connection with on World of Warcraft or any other game system, don't make the mistake of thinking that you have to be big and shiny and impressive. You don't want to impress people. What you want to focus on is connecting with them, because Paula Abdul lied to us. Opposites don't attract. We like people who are similar to us. So find the things that you both love and see if you can love them together.
Fantastic advice. I could not agree more. Harris O'Malley, Dr. Nerdlove, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. This has been great.
This has been Polygamer, a Gamebits production. Find more episodes, read our blog, or send feedback at polygamer.net.